The headlines broadcast our next kinetic asset, a hypersonic strike weapon inspected by the Secretary of War himself at a private facility. This is the sanctioned narrative. It is also a strategic liability. While we fixate on symmetric warfare, matching missile for missile, we ignore the true battle space. The real war is not kinetic. It is silent. It is infrastructural. Our adversaries, from a resilient Russia to a cornered Iran, understand this. They have no incentive to engage in a high-cost, symmetric fight they cannot win. The calculus is simple. Why destroy a carrier group when you can sever the global financial system? This is the blueprint for defeating a superpower with a degraded industrial base but a dominant financial system. You do not attack its body. You attack its nervous system. You create a blind Leviathan. A blind Leviathan is a state with unmatched firepower rendered impotent. Its satellites are painted, its data links are severed. It has a launch-on-warning posture with no warning to receive. It cannot track assets. It cannot settle trades. It cannot verify liquidity. The attack is not an explosion. It is the systemic, deafening silence that precedes a global solvency crisis. The weapon is not a missile. It is a dial tone. The motive for attacking America's financial solvency is not ideology. It is a mathematical calculation driven by a domestic solvency crisis within the adversary's own regime. You must understand the war not as a choice, but as a liability that must be serviced. CSAS analysis confirms the core principle. For a cornered leadership, a protracted, unpopular war is the ultimate domestic liability. It depletes political capital faster than it depletes ammunition. Every day, the kinetic fight continues. The risk of internal regime collapse accelerates. This isn't about patriotism. It's about the balance sheet of power. The adversary's economy is not the primary pressure point. Reports from The Guardian confirm that even with fluctuating oil prices, Russia's economy is structured for resilience against total collapse. The weakness is not economic, it is political. The state can endure, but the leadership cannot endure an endless, unpopular war. This creates a systemic trap. The U.S. doubles down on symmetric deterrence, with leadership inspecting next-generation hypersonic platforms at facilities like Castellion. This signals an escalation of kinetic cost that the adversary cannot afford to match. They see the blueprint for a long, expensive, symmetric conflict, the exact scenario their domestic liability sheet cannot tolerate. Weakness forces a pivot. When you cannot win on the established battlefield, you must move the battlefield. The adversary is forced, by their own internal solvency crisis, to bypass the symmetric, kinetic fight entirely. Their survival depends on it. They must escalate asymmetrically. They are forced to revector their strategy away from military targets and towards the true American center of gravity, its financial architecture. The goal is no longer to win the war, but to make the cost of America's strategy unpayable. It is a launch-on-warning protocol, triggered not by missiles, but by their own political balance sheet hitting zero. The central equation is not symmetric. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, puts the kinetic cost exchange in stark relief, a $5 million main battle tank versus a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a battle. It is an economic liquidation event. The adversary achieves a 10,000 to 1 return on capital, converting cheap electronics into the instantaneous write-off of a core U.S. military asset. This isn't a failure of battlefield tactics. It is a catastrophic failure of economic modeling. This vector of attack is enabled by a principle analysts call the democratization of violence. The lethality, once monopolized by nation-states with trillion-dollar defense budgets, is now accessible to any group with a credit card and an internet connection. Advanced kinetic capability has been decoupled from industrial and economic power. An adversary doesn't need to match U.S. industrial output. They only need to achieve a cost-per-kill ratio that makes a conventional response financially unsustainable. The U.S. response, exemplified by firms like Castelion working on rapid production missile technologies, is to accelerate the production of expensive, symmetric solutions. This protocol fundamentally misunderstands the threat. The goal of the adversary is not to win a symmetric fight. The goal is to force a solvency crisis by making the U.S. burn through its treasury to replace assets. Every destroyed tank is a systemic liability, forcing the U.S. onto a launch-on-warning footing not for nuclear war, but for economic collapse. The next theater of war is not a recognized battle space. It is a distributed network of failing states and volatile regions, deliberately cultivated as proxy laboratories. These are the gray zones, the staging areas for a new vector of systemic attack. According to analysts at CSIS, Western adversaries are no longer planning to meet the U.S. kinetically. They are using regional instability as a disposable test bed to engineer a solvency crisis. The core of the miscalculation is here. The U.S. is doubling down on symmetric deterrence, celebrating firms like Castelion for their rapid production hypersonic platforms. This is a known protocol, building a better, faster weapon. However, the kinetic cost and industrial fragility of this strategy are a mathematical liability. It signals to adversaries that the U.S. is preparing for a fight they have no intention of joining. This forces a pivot. Cornered and resilient actors like Iran, facing internal protests and the risk of escalation, are prime candidates for asymmetric escalation. Reports from entities like The Guardian confirm Russia's economy is now insulated against conventional economic pressure, freeing their resources. They cannot match a hypersonic arsenal, therefore they must bypass it. This is not a choice, it is a strategic necessity. This is where the proxy laboratories become the weapon. An adversary does not need to launch a missile at the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. Instead, as RUSI analysts warn, they can weaponize a pre-existing crisis in a commodity-rich nation. By fueling instability, they can test low-cost, high-impact attacks on port logistics, undersea data cables, or regional banking systems, all with complete deniability. It is a live-fire exercise against the true American center of gravity, its financial architecture. The blueprint is now operational. Expect a calibrated escalation from these gray zones. The next phase is not a declaration of war. It will be a sudden, inexplicable glitch in a critical supply chain, a rogue wave of volatility in a key commodity market, or a bank run in a partner nation, all originating from a seemingly unrelated pocket of regional chaos. The objective is singular: to launch an undeclared asymmetric assault on U.S. solvency. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a strategy. It is a mathematical trap. It is a nuclear response protocol designed to counter a decapitation strike by authorizing a full-scale retaliatory launch based on satellite and radar data. Before kinetic impact. With legacy ICBMs, the decision timeline was approximately 30 minutes. The pursuit of symmetric hypersonic dominance, evidenced by development at firms like Castelion, source number 1, has compressed this timeline to under 5 minutes. This acceleration creates a systemic liability. An adversary facing this overwhelming kinetic cost is forced to pivot. Instead of matching a trillion-dollar weapons platform, they invest in a low-cost asymmetric vector, cyber warfare. This creates the fog of digital war. According to RUSI threat models, the primary objective is not to destroy the command bunker, but to blind it. A targeted cyber attack on the space-based infrared system or ground-based radar creates a signal blackout. The commander is now presented with a zero-sum choice. Is the signal loss a simple network failure, or is it the prelude to a wave of undetectable hypersonic warheads arriving in minutes? With no data, the protocol's logic becomes a weapon turned against itself. The fear of losing the entire arsenal to a first strike forces the commander to assume the worst-case scenario. The absence of a signal becomes the signal. This is the true asymmetric escalation. The adversary forces the launch decision purely out of fear, triggered by a digital anomaly. They leverage America's own doctrine to threaten global stability. A launch order, even if recalled, would trigger an instantaneous solvency crisis, vaporizing markets and shattering the U.S. dollar's credibility, the nation's true center of gravity. Adversaries like Russia have, according to reports, been actively engineering their economies to withstand precisely this type of external shock, horse number 4. They are not preparing for a kinetic war, they are preparing for the financial aftermath of a war the U.S. starts with itself. The pursuit of symmetric kinetic dominance, confirmed by leadership inspecting next-generation hypersonic platforms, is a strategic misdirection. CSIS and RUSI models consistently show the U.S. industrial base cannot sustain a high-intensity peer conflict. Resilient adversaries, noted in reports on Russia and Iran, understand this mathematical certainty. They will not challenge the U.S. kinetically. They will bypass the liability of a conventional exchange and escalate asymmetrically against the true center of gravity, U.S. financial solvency. The target is not the carrier group, it is the clearinghouse. The calibration shot will occur within 12 months. Expect a localized, high-frequency liquidity seizure targeting a secondary financial hub, such as the one serviced by the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. For 90 minutes, interbank settlement will fail. The event will be attributed publicly to a cascading system glitch, or a solar flare. It is a signal, a test of the system's brittleness before the real asset liquidation begins.